CBS News coverage of Elections 72. Tonight, the latest returns. This broadcast is sponsored by Payne, Weber, Jackson, and Curtis. We help you know about investing. Reporting from CBS News election headquarters in New York, here is correspondent Walter Cronkite.
Well, the polls have closed in some 10 states across the United States by now. 20% of the polling places are closed by state, at any rate. And after the most expensive campaign in American political history, it appears to have availed the Democrats, as far as the presidency goes, at any rate, very, very little. The landslide seems to have developed very early for President Nixon. We have 7 states, according to our CBS News estimate, that we can say definitely are in President Nixon's camp tonight, and others, many others, are leaning that way. We have, in just the last few minutes, been able to estimate that President Nixon will win in Florida by some 66% of the vote there, that he has won in Georgia. The exact figure we don't have as yet on our estimate. He will win in Alabama also, that figure to come along. Before these 3 decisions were made, we could say also that he had won Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee, Ohio. So with those 7 states, President Nixon has 95 of the electoral votes needed toward that 270 magic figure, which puts him over the top for a re-election. The actual count of the popular vote so far, with about 3% of the nation's vote in, President Nixon has gone over the million figure, 1,125,000. That's 67% of the vote. George McGovern, 538,000, 32% of the vote. John Smith's, the American Independent Party candidate, 18,000 votes, or about 1%. There are, as you also know, some 11 other minor parties that are on the ballot in various states, everything from the Communist Party to the Universalist Party. Universalist Party is on the ballot in one state. Its platform is to make flying saucers more respectable, apparently, and those votes will be tabulated a little later on. For a report from Nixon headquarters now at the Shoreham Hotel in Washington, let's go to Dan Shore.
Yes, well, about 3% of the vote. That's in terms of what you know, but in terms of the rosy predictions here, there have been briefings in which Herbert Klein, the White House Communications Director, has said that he expects 48 states for President Nixon. The only ones he said were in doubt were Massachusetts and West Virginia. And Harry Dent, the White House Southern strategist, said no, West Virginia is going to be in, which makes 49. They attributed this to the landslide, to the whole large turnout at the polls. They expect to have as many as 85 million votes, which is considerably better than the 73 million in 1968 and the 70.5 million in 1964. One interesting thing, Harry Dent says that he expects that after the election, several Southern senators and congressmen will switch their affiliation to the Republican Party so that if the Republicans don't pick up the necessary seats to organize Congress, they'll be able to do so by some switches. He wouldn't mention names. He denied there were any deals. Could be Senator Eastland, could be Senator Byrd of Virginia, now independent. But there appears to be something in the making about a switch of parties by some of the nominal Democrats in the South. With me is Michelle Clark, who is looking at the scene out here as they get ready for the victory celebration with President Nixon and Vice President Agnew. Michelle?
Walter, apparently the only plans here have always been for a victory celebration. The point is just how large the victory is going to be. The bands have been playing here for an hour. There's talk that the president should arrive here sometime before midnight. His cabinet members, all of the people in the party are expected to be here. There should be a lot of young people. There are 2 kinds of bands. There's Pete Fountain, and then there's a rock band for the younger people. We'll wait and see. Right now there's not much room for enthusiasm except when the announcements are made. There's a big screen over our shoulders that show all of the networks telling you exactly what we're projecting, and there's a cheer that goes up, of course, every time there's something said about a big landslide victory here. And that's all we've got from here now. Walter?
Now for the scene at McGovern headquarters, let's go to Bruce Morton at the Coliseum in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Bruce?
For for election night, and once they volunteered to do all the artwork, while a couple of local families volunteered to put them up. The way the returns have been going, I don't know. Maybe it's not a rainbow, maybe it's a sunset, but that be as it may. This place is very empty, as you can see. The reason is not that Senator McGovern lacks friends in South Dakota. He has lots of them. The reason is that the Secret Service, until just a few minutes ago, had been sweeping the Coliseum here. Not that they'd had any warnings, but simply the standard kind of security check that they do anytime the candidate goes somewhere. That process just ended a few minutes ago. Senator McGovern himself, as you know, went to Mitchell, South Dakota to vote today. Stopped by on the way back at a family-owned shoe store in Mitchell and bought himself 2 pairs of shoes, some black loafers and a pair of boots, the first boots he said he'd ever owned. It's not any kind of an election day tradition. One of the owners of the store said they just seem to know McGovern's size, and quite often when he's in Mitchell, he stops by and does a little business there. We drove back from there here to Sioux Falls. It's just under a 70-mile drive. McGovern went to one more reception here, which makes him an unusually active candidate for an election day. And then went from there for some quiet time in the hotel where he's staying. He doesn't have a house here in Sioux Falls, just a small apartment over his office in Mitchell. He's having dinner, we're told, watching 3 television sets, impartially, 1 to each network. And just in the far corner of this room, past the stage there's a little holding room with some more television sets, a couch or 2, some easy chairs. That's where he'll be coming eventually to wait and get a final look at the returns before he comes out and talks to his supporters here. We are told that is not likely to happen anytime very early. Not that McGovern doesn't believe in projections, but he wants to wait and let the raw vote pile up for a while before he does anything. There'll be some music here later on. It's very quiet now. Walter?
Bruce, we were told earlier that in that Mr. Berg shoe store where he bought those 2 pairs of shoes, he was extended credit. I gather he has been in the past, but today I guess that's a vote of confidence at any rate that he didn't come out of the campaign too badly off financially.
Well, I think on a senator's salary you can afford a couple pairs of shoes. They're not badly paid.
All right, Bruce. The reports from around as we have been reporting them to you, indicate that President Nixon certainly is going to win, and probably with a record margin of votes, perhaps over that 61.8 that President Johnson was reelected by in 1964 over Barry Goldwater. CBS News coverage of Election Night 72 will continue in a moment.
You've got responsibilities. You want to invest for the future. Payne Weber knows it's tough to decide what's best. Should you buy stocks for long-term capital gains possibilities or for income? What about municipal bonds or corporate bonds or mutual funds? Get professional help with your investments. Talk to Payne Weber. After all, it's your money. You'd better know how to invest it. Payne Weber helps you know.
Princess, I've come to grant you a wish.
One measly wish? Okay, Big Sender, the JCPenney catalog. And I want these flowered sheets.
Now you have your pretty JCPenney no-iron decorator sheets. Goodbye.
Not so fast. Now I want a tennis...
It's all in the JCPenney catalog. We know what you're looking for.
When you first start up, does your car stall out? Try Shell's new Super Regular. Besides high-octane components of a super gasoline, it has the good drivability components of a modern regular. This helps protect against annoying stall-outs. Try Shell's low-lead Super Regular. Shell products perform.
We might emphasize here that the figures we've been posting so far are preliminary ones. Our CBS News estimates are derived from selected sample precincts across the country. The voting and counting of those votes is far from over across the United States as a whole. State and local offices, many public questions often are decided by very small margins, so we urge you, if you can still vote in your state, your area, why you ought to go out and do your duty and do so. Now let's go to the South and a report from there. Roger Mike. Walter, since we last left you, our solid South was 2 states solid to the Republicans, and it's grown since our last report, and now you can see the difference with the addition to President Nixon's column of Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. So already in the South, he's picked up 5 of those 13 states. Just reading quickly at our vote profile precincts in the South, in 1968, Richard Nixon carried 32% of the vote in the South from the rural and small towns. Tonight, 75%. The big difference, again, is the George Wallace vote from 4 years ago. In 1968, Hubert Humphrey picked up 36% of those districts that normally vote solidly Democratic. President Nixon got 35% of them. Tonight, President Nixon carrying 68% of the vote from the high Democratic districts. In Florida tonight, our vote profile analysis indicates the president again has taken Florida, which has gone Republican over the last 20 years. The percentage ultimately indicates 72-28 for Richard Nixon in Florida. The popular vote in Florida to date, with about 8% of the vote in, shows Richard Nixon leading 3-1 there. In Georgia, with 12 electoral votes, President Nixon is the winner there, 2% of the vote in, leading about 4-1. In the Alabama presidential race, the president is the winner there, according to our vote estimate. Our popular vote shows 2% in, leading about 4-1 there. In Kentucky, in the presidential race, 79% of that vote in. He won that state at least an hour ago. They're running a little less than 2-1. In the Tennessee presidential race, 33% in, with 10 electoral votes from Tennessee, already won by Richard Nixon. The popular vote shows him running about 2-1. And in the Tennessee vote profile analysis indicates the ultimate percentage there will be 71-29. In the Tennessee senatorial race, we have a winner there, Howard Baker, the Republican incumbent, going for his 2nd term, has now defeated Ray Blanton, a Democrat from Central Tennessee, who was redistricted. But tonight, Howard Baker has won, although he did not pull the vote that Richard Nixon did. And finally, in the Kentucky Senate race, Louis Nunn, the former Republican governor, is now trailing Walter D. Huddleston, the Democrat, by about 20,000 votes. This is a seat that the Republicans must keep to win control of the Senate. And also tonight, Walter, we have an interesting Senate race in Alabama. John Sparkman, who has been in the Senate since 1946, has defeated Winton Red Blunt, the former Postmaster General, and that was really no surprise. It was one of the GOP's last hopes to break through the solid South in the Senate. And finally, as an indication of what coattails are and what they are not, in the Kentucky race tonight, in the 3rd district, which is the congressional district around Louisville, Romano Mazzoli, who won in 1970 with the closest margin of any congressional district in the state, 211 votes, tonight has defeated his Republican opponent, this time 60% to 40%. So President Nixon's presence on the ballot didn't help any Republican in that district. Indicates that there is ticket splitting going on, certainly there, at any rate. Not only there, but also just looking at the boards in Alabama. We mentioned the Red Blunt, John Sparkman race. Richard Nixon there, a 5-1 leader over McGovern in the Alabama president, but in the Alabama Senate, it's Sparkman about 3-2. Wasn't it expected that Blunt would do a little better than that, actually? They hoped he would do better. But it wasn't expected. John Sparkman carried with him, Walter, a thick black book, and in it was a list of every pork barrel and public service project he ever brought home for Alabama. Pork barrel if you're on the other side. It's public service if you're on that side. Well, I used both definitions so Mr. Blunt wouldn't call. And Our popular vote now is still at around 3% of the national vote, 1.5 million almost for President Nixon, 693,000 for Senator McGovern. That's a 67 to 32% spread. Let's go now to the Middle West and Dan Rather. Dan?
Walter, Ohio and Indiana are the stories in the Midwest at the moment. In Ohio, our CBS News estimate is that President Nixon has carried Ohio. This is with 4% of the precincts recording. That was the vote in and tabulated. But our CBS News estimate is that President Nixon has won Ohio with something on the order of 61% of the vote. Now, and an analysis of how that happened, according to our close look at our own sample precincts, runs this way. President Nixon in Ohio is doing roughly 16% better this time than he did in 1968, mostly on the basis of getting virtually all of the old Wallace votes and a few more votes than he got the last time in the suburban areas. Now, George McGovern is running in Ohio about 4% behind the totals of Senator Hubert Humphrey in 1968. It's rare that anyone wins the presidency without carrying Ohio, and President Nixon has not only won Ohio, but he has done it in devastating fashion, if our CBS News estimate is correct. Interesting enough, in Ohio, as is the case in Indiana, President Nixon running better in the black communities than he did in 1968, coming close to doubling his margins in the black communities of Ohio. That on the basis of very early returns, although to repeat for emphasis, CBS News estimates that President Nixon has won the state of Ohio. In Indiana, as we told you a bit earlier, President Nixon apparently has won Indiana with 27% of the precincts, and he has a margin of better than, well, about 3 to 1 over George McGovern. But our CBS News estimate in Indiana is that President Nixon's final total in Indiana will be on the order of 67%. Now, in the Indiana governor's race, a coattail effect possibly there, although some thought that the Republican Otis Bowen, the Speaker of the Indiana House and a physician, would take that race anyway. But in the Indiana gubernatorial race, with our CBS News estimate is that Bowen's final total may be on the order of 59%. I know with all these figures coming at you, percentages, sample precincts, and what have you, it's very hard to keep this in any kind of perspective. But if what has happened in Ohio and Indiana holds for the rest of the Midwest, it's far too early to say that it will, but particularly with Ohio, you've got some indicators that it may. What you may see here is President Nixon winding up with an all-time landslide margin. That's the outer perimeter of what we're dealing with in the Midwest based on these sample precincts in Indiana and Ohio, because the president is running extremely strong in the suburban areas. In some suburban areas of Ohio, the president carried by better than 70%. He's running double what he did before in black communities. The only two areas in terms of voter demographics in Indiana and Ohio that George McGovern did well in were low-income areas, very low-income areas, and in the black community. While we say that George McGovern did not as well in the black community as Hubert Humphrey did, still those are the only two areas in Ohio and Indiana that he's carrying. If this holds, what we may be seeing in the Midwest, Walter, is not just a landslide, but the beginning of a glacier.
Well, of course, what President Nixon would like would be landslide proportions to give him a record, and that would take over 61% of the vote. President Johnson got 61.1%, I believe it was, in 1964 over Senator Goldwater. We can now say, on the basis of our CBS News sample precinct analysis, that President Nixon has won in Virginia, another southern state falling to him, so that the southern South, the solid South, once solidly Democratic, looks this year, as Roger Mudd has told you before, solidly Republican. CBS News coverage of Election Night 72 will continue in a moment.
Jaguar XJ6 sedan, a truly well-made luxury car for around $9,000.
The new 1973 Ford LTD Brougham, a truly quiet luxury car priced thousands less. Quiet is the sound of a well-made car.
The Jaguar's a bit more powerful, of course. Well, you'd expect that for the money. Four-wheel power disc brakes, cut pile carpeting.
The LTD, front power disc brakes, cut pile carpeting too.
Power steering, automatic transmission.
Standard here too.
Power window option.
In LTD too, plus a power mini vent. You can have a reclining seat in the LTD. Now I'm sure your 5-passenger Jaguar is worth its price. Yet LTD offers the same kind of luxury features for thousands less. And it seats 6. Ford LTD, where quiet is the sound of a well-made car. See it. Drive it at your Ford dealers now.
At JCPenney, we like to keep your hands out of trouble. That's why we've built a lot of safeguards into this 7¼ circular saw. A lever up top to work the blade guard to keep your fingers away from the blade. A guard that keeps blade exposure above the work to a minimum. And a security switch that helps prevent accidental startups. All for only $49.99. Only at JCPenney. We're doing everything we can to keep your hands out of trouble.
Let's take a look at our eastern states now with Mike Wallace. Mike?
The president has carried Vermont, which is no surprise, with 3 electoral votes. Let's take a look at the boards and see that 4% of the precincts are reporting in Vermont, with Mr. Nixon running about 2-1 ahead of Senator McGovern. But when you take a look at vote profiles analysis, CBS News estimate, we do not have any figures on the CBS News estimate for Vermont, but we do know that the president will carry Vermont with its 3 electoral votes. What we're looking for in the East, of course, is what Mr. Nixon will do in the way of a landslide here as well as in the Republican heartland. Back in 1960, he took just 11 electoral votes in all of the eastern states. In 1968, he took 27 electoral votes. There are 144 of them here, and he is hoping tonight to take at least 127 of the electoral votes in the eastern United States. Walter?
Nixon has won Illinois. That's our CBS News estimate on the basis of our sample precincts in Illinois, one of the major states which it was considered that Senator McGovern had to win in order to have a chance at this year's election, has now fallen to President Nixon. And that big block of electoral votes from Illinois goes into his column. He now has 133 votes, just electoral votes, that is, just 5 electoral votes short of half of the 270 he needs to win the presidency. He has now 1,750,000 votes to McGovern's 828,000, holding on to a 67 to 32% margin of landslide proportions. We'll be back shortly with more results from election night 72, but first the latest from our local stations on the races in your area. This is Walter Cronkite at our CBS News election headquarters.
This is CBS.